I've been condemned to live. Those words are uttered by a man who finds himself alone on Earth after a scientific catastrophe of the highest order, and they ring strongly with loneliness and an overwhelming sense of guilt and remorse. It is no accident that Zach Hobson has found himself in this predicament. Director Jeff Murphy's 1985 cult sci-fi film The Quiet Earth is an unusual entry in the Last Man on Earth subgenre of cinema that has been well traveled, but is not overpopulated. Most films of this ilk tend to take place in a post-apocalyptic landscape. A nuclear war has devastated the world and wiped out everyone or created human mutations. A zombie plague has ravaged and altered mankind. Or a viral infection has transformed the populace into vampiric scavengers. Murphy's movie, adapted by Bill Baer, star Bruno Lawrence, and producer Sam Pillsbury from Craig Harrison's novel of the same name, takes a different approach and one that leaves it open to multiple interpretations, particularly with its enigmatic, eye-popping final scene. The Quiet Earth starts off in a deceptively passive fashion. Scientist Zach Hobson awakens naked in a motel bed at 6:12 in the morning. He's groggy and slightly disoriented. While it might look like an ordinary day, something is amiss. The clock has stopped. There are no radio transmissions. As he steps out into the world, Zach soon realizes something unnerving. All people and animals have literally disappeared. The sounds of insects have ceased. There is an ominous silence permeating the New Zealand landscape. It's as if he's the last man in New Zealand, but the implication here is that he is the last man on Earth. And just for a moment, I'd like to make an aside about the disappearance of all the living creatures in the movie. People envision the end of days or the end of the world as coming through cataclysmic events, massive devastation. Whether we bring about our own end through climate change, nuclear war, whatever. But the truth is that the world will not crack open, nor will nature take its revenge through wild storms, earthquakes, or tidal waves like you might see in Roland Emmerich disaster flicks. The reality is that we will simply cease to be as a species. The world will still be here, and many places will be just as beautiful as ever, existing long after we've gone. And this is a nice touch in Murphy's film. Now, getting back to the story, we soon learn that Zach was a scientist who worked on an international corporate collaboration dubbed Project Flashlight, an endeavor in which companies in multiple countries around the globe were experimenting with energy transmissions through a grid surrounding the Earth. As an example, planes could siphon energy from it and not need to refuel. The implication here is that this grid could power other vehicles and machines, further technology worldwide. But Zach knew something was not right with the project, that key information was being withheld from the New Zealand contingent, and indeed, things went awry. Upon the launching of Project Flashlight at 6:12 that fateful morning, the effect, as we come to know it, wiped out every living being on Earth. When Zach goes to the lab compound he worked in, he discovers a lone, electrocuted corpse of a coworker, and this confirms that what they were working on definitely led to what transpired. After nearly being entombed down there when the security system detects a radiation leak and seals up the facility, Zach creates an explosion to escape and sets out to find other signs of life. He has no luck. For the first third of the movie, Zach wanders around on his own, eventually taking up residence at a palatial estate, driving a nice car through a mall as he shops, and sampling the finer things in life, but with no one to share them with. There's literally no one out there, and he begins losing his mind, as pretty much any of us would. He even gives a speech to a collection of cardboard stand-ups of famous and infamous figures, ranging from Bob Marley to Winston Churchill to Adolf Hitler. As he plays background chants from a Nazi rally for ironic effect, he declares that after helping to aid madmen in their objectives, he is now appropriately president of this quiet Earth. Then the electricity goes out across the city and surrounding suburbs, and Zach begins a brief, destructive rampage born from a nihilistic rage. As this tale of solitary confinement in open spaces unfolds, one begins to wonder, is this reality? Is he in some alternate reality or timeline? Or perhaps is he wandering through some self-generated purgatory as he contemplates how his work has led to humanity's extinction? But then fortune smiles on him. After moving into a beautiful lakeside house, he encounters Joanne, a smart and pretty woman who may likely become the new Eve to his new Adam. They find companionship amid the beautiful countryside and amid the isolation. The romantic bliss blooms as they search for other survivors. And further along, Zach encounters Api, a Maori tribesman who also survived the effect. And thus a romantic triangle, and later romantic competition, begins to form. We come to learn that all three of our protagonists died at the exact same moment that the effect took place. Api was being drowned by his mate, whose wife desired him. Api had rejected her, and she committed suicide. Both he and his friend felt it was his fault, hence the attack. Zach ended his own life, unable to live with the potentially destructive project he had helped create. Joanne, on the other hand, was simply electrocuted using her hairdryer. With the libidinous tension rising among them, and with a bit of racial conflict emerging during a misunderstanding, the trio becomes aware of residual ripples of the effect. At one point, they occupy the same space but cannot see or hear each other. Zach realizes that they need to blow up the satellite dish at his old lab in an attempt to knock out part of the grid infrastructure. This will hopefully prevent any further damage from spreading to New Zealand and around the globe. Knowing this needs to be done, and painfully aware that he has become the odd man out in the Adam and Eve and Adam scenario, he rams a truck full of explosives into the dish, killing himself yet again, and being transported to what appears to be a moon of Saturn, giving us the film's indelible penultimate image, which includes a line of what appear to be mushroom-like clouds on the horizon. In fact, co-writer Sam Pillsbury was part of the anti-nuclear movement in New Zealand at the time, which led to a permanent ban on nuclear weapons and power in the country that I believe remains in effect today. Now, like the ending of 2001, the concluding sequence of The Quiet Earth has inspired plenty of debate in the decades since its release. Has Zach gone to the afterlife? Is he in a new reality created by the effect? Is he actually on a moon of Saturn? Your interpretation of the film will likely depend upon your personal beliefs. If you want to look at it from a scientific point of view, Zach and his associates clearly created a rip in the space-time fabric of the Earth, which now threatens to further destabilize not only the planet, but the sun itself. In the process of playing God by tampering with elements they did not fully comprehend, he and the scientists brought about the end of mankind in a way that no one imagined. Which does make you wonder, where did they all go? Did the same thing that happens to Zach at the end happen to them? Are they in some far-flung reality? In a 2015 episode of the Projection Booth podcast, director Jeff Murphy said that he felt that Zach has simply been transported to another reality. In an interesting side note, the director also noted that the screenplay originally ended with Oppie and Joanne becoming the new Adam and Eve. That ending was deemed unsatisfactory, and so they added in Zach's jump to another reality. Another interpretive possibility here is that this is a nightmarish dream that Zach has conjured in his own mind. Given that we have little to no backstory for the three main characters, we are allowed to project some of our feelings and aspects of ourselves onto them. In my opinion, it is clear that Zach is a dedicated scientist, perhaps at great cost to his personal life. He did commit suicide in a motel room, away from his home, and for the brief moments we see him in his apartment later, we can see no family photos or mementos of any kind. I'm contemplating this angle because the first act of The Quiet Earth reminds me of the inaugural episode of The Twilight Zone, entitled Where Is Everybody?, in which a lone man wanders through a deserted town with vague signs of life. A smoking cigar, tower bells ringing, sort of hints at the recent presence of people. By the end of that episode, we discover that the man is an astronaut who has been confined to an isolation booth for over 400 hours, and he finally cracks and succumbs to frightening delusions. The broken clock in the chamber reads 6:16 a.m., interestingly enough. The Quiet Earth also resembles a 1959 film The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, in which Harry Belafonte, Ingrid Stevens, and Mel Ferrer find themselves the last people on Earth, and a similar romantic conflict and competition also emerges, and there are also racial overtones to that story. Is it possible that Zach Hobson is living in some personally conjured nightmare? He carries around an audio recorder everywhere he goes to document what is happening, and in the final shot of the film, as he gazes out upon the new alien landscape he is a part of, he is clutching it in his left hand. He looks at it as if to say, well, who's going to be around now to hear all of my recordings now that I'm gone? I mean, he's been documenting this for somebody to hear, but now there's no one left but himself. Along a parallel line of thought, and moving into a more theological context, Zach could be experiencing purgatory, which has been interpreted by some as either a place or a state of being. In the same Projection Booth podcast I referred to earlier, Sam Pillsbury also makes an appearance and says that he believes in this theory since the director is allegedly a lapsed Catholic. Those who reside in purgatory have not yet had their souls cleansed or purified of sin so that they can move on to heaven. Zach clearly wants to atone for both the monstrous project he helped create and for fleeing his responsibility and culpability by killing himself. His overriding quest throughout the story, beyond companionship, is to stop the effect from reoccurring. Near the end, Zach confesses to Joanne that he feels like he is the victim of some huge conspiracy and that she and Oppie have been sent to be his guardians. But Oppie is also feeling guilt, specifically over the death of his mate's wife, even though that is not something, at least from what we can come to ascertain about his character, that is truly his fault. When Joanne asks him why his friend was trying to kill him, Oppie replies that he killed his friend's wife, which ends up not being true. But he feels guilt over what transpired, and perhaps feels like he's not worthy of having love back in his life. The only member of this trio who does not seem to have come with any overriding guilt or unresolved life issues is Joanne, who appears to be more of an angelic figure who provides comfort and healing to both men, although she eventually bends her favor towards Oppie. While Oppie and Joanne seem to have found happiness, and perhaps they are prepared to move on to heaven, Zach drives a truckload of dynamite into the lab and blows it up. This is both a noble act of self-sacrifice and another attempt to flee from a reality he does not like, particularly as he feels that he has lost Joanne to Oppie. And this leads me to the darkest interpretation of the film, which is that Zach Hobson resides in hell, where he arrived, ironically, after attempting to play God. In Catholicism, the worst sin that you can commit is to kill yourself, and that leads you to that fiery inferno or pit that many people fear. However, what is represented here is not a cliche hell full of devils, demons, fire, brimstone, wailing souls. It is a rather beautiful landscape that is barren of life. And when someone else does come along, an alluring woman to ease Zach's emotional pain and need for physical comfort, she soon gets swept up by another man, leaving him to feel alone again. And this leads him to commit suicide one more time. In fact, he contemplates suicide during the first act of the film before he and Joanne find one another. In the film's finale, Zach faces a new kind of hell, in a world that is foreign to him and in which he is utterly alone. One could interpret this as a hell of his own making. Regardless of how you choose to interpret The Quiet Earth, whether it's in a more literal context or on a more metaphorical bent, an overarching theme here is redemption. Zach embraces this idea the deeper we go into the story, and it leads to his impulsive decision to blow up the satellite dish by himself. And in a way, maybe he has redeemed himself, but it feels like that act is not completely selfless, and he ends up on this other world. Perhaps he has other issues he needs to work out. Now, what makes The Quiet Earth such a great film after 33 years is that it still has the power to captivate us and make us think. It's well directed, it's well acted, it's beautifully photographed, and it really, it makes your brain cells work a little harder. And it is done so working from a modest budget, with minimal means, but with plenty of imagination. This is Bryan Reesman, entertainment journalist and author in New York, on Friday, March 30th, 2018.